Story 1. I was assigned to the Spanish-speaking half of the company, had all my meetings in Spanish, and was then fired for performance even though I do not speak Spanish. Story 2. Fired for texting on the job by the department director. I was responding to a message from my department manager. Story 3. I took a job at Kmart for the summer. I was told after 3 months I wasn't suitable for Kmart, so I went back to college and became a biochemist. Story 4. I contracted COVID, was out sick for a week, emailed my manager that I had COVID, and checked in daily. My manager claimed that I abandoned the job. Story 5. So this is kind of a fun one. How about the first time I was fired? It's been well over a decade. I had barely started working at a business that would now be defined as fast casual. Due to having classes several nights a week, I had made it very clear that I had scheduling limitations. This was fine with the manager who hired me, but the night shift manager took an immediate disliking to me. This manager started by complaining about the quality of my work and became quite upset when I asked why only the male employees were required to clean the restrooms. It wasn't tied to seniority. About a month in, the manager I worked well with left due to a promotion. The night it was official that he was gone, I was fired. All 3 write-ups came after I had left work that night. Apparently, I left early, which wasn't possible. I had a hard cutoff that night. The lobby wasn't clean enough, but it had been closed that day. I also hadn't received management approval to clock out, which had never been an issue before. In the end, this terrible manager claimed the holiday of another country as a reason for why she couldn't be bothered to get me my final paycheck on time. Frankly, she did me a favor by cutting me loose immediately. Looking back, I can see that staying would have been much worse. Story 6. My mother was diagnosed with cancer. A week later, my niece took her own life. I fell into a deep depression and did not show up for work for the rest of the week. I was 19, and that was my first significant loss. I handled it poorly, but I am glad I moved on from that phase of my life. Story 7. I submitted my 2-week notice, and it was accepted. 2 days later, I was forced out for reasons deemed unacceptable. If those reasons were truly unacceptable, the entire office would need to be fired for doing the same things daily for years. I filed for unemployment due to retaliation for my 2-week notice, and my claim was approved. They appealed my unemployment and lost again. That turned out to be a wonderful 6-month paid vacation at their expense. Story 8. I was hired as a manager at a boutique hotel, didn't take a day off in 6 months, and tried my best to improve everything from staff morale to the quality of the food being served. I hired many nice and good-looking people and gave them some leeway so they would be happy, like letting them occasionally eat mangoes and blueberries from the breakfast buffet. After a year, the director brought in a consultant who negatively affected everyone's mood and bullied half of the staff. I ended up confronting him in a petty manner, and I received a 5-month severance pay. After some time, I returned and felt glad that I had left. Story 9. My substitute Spanish teacher was fired from my middle school for spanking a student after that student pulled down her pants. Story 10. I'm not fired yet, but I'm very close. The office bully and his gossiping sidekick have been trying hard to get me terminated. The new manager seems to side with them. I'm just waiting. Apparently, I'm not social enough and I don't like being yelled at or bullied. So they've made it their mission to get rid of me. They will succeed soon. I just try to get through the day. Once I'm fired, I'll figure out what to do then. Remember this, hell is other people. Story 11. I closed the store 2 minutes before closing time. The mall was quiet, and I wanted to go home. Little did I know the manager was monitoring me from other stores to gather this information. Story 12. Officially, I was let go for failure to return, which also resulted in a corporate not rehirable flag due to being a flight risk. What actually happened was we had a change in ownership, which led to a change in management. I don't know why, but the new manager seemed to dislike me from day one. They told me I didn't know how to do my job and that I was lying about my position. Within a month, I went from being a shift lead, about to take the assistant manager exam and working 45 hours per week, to being a cashier at the concession stand, working 13 hours per week. My pay was also reduced from $12.50 to $6.25 because I lost my shift lead and assistant manager in training bonuses. I tried to deal with the situation, thinking maybe they thought I was too young for that level of work. I hoped that taking the assistant manager exam would prove I knew what I was doing. I talked to human resources and put in my request for time off because the test was at the corporate office in another state and it would take me a few days to get there, take the test, and return. In total, I took 1 week off as unpaid personal leave. I went, took my test, and passed it with flying colors. I drove home and waited and waited. 3 weeks passed and I wasn't on the new schedules. During the third week, I wasn't even on the list of employees anymore. On the fourth day of week 3, I received a call from one of the shift leaders asking if I could come in. Since I hadn't worked in a month, I needed the money. I worked a 12-hour day, followed by a good 45 minutes of being yelled at by the manager because I wasn't on the clock or authorized to cover a shift. I wasn't on the schedule for week 4. When I went to pick up my paycheck for the day I worked, I noticed my time punch was missing. Finally, around week 7, I received a letter in the mail informing me that I was no longer employed due to going on leave and never returning. This was not considered being fired, so I would qualify for unemployment benefits. Yes, I did consult an employment lawyer who informed me that I likely had a case. However, it would cost about $20,000 in 1990s money to fight, probably resulting in me winning less than $10,000 in lost wages. Additionally, I would be on the corporate blacklist for the company, meaning I would likely be under scrutiny until they found a reason to fire me. Could even prevent me from using the company's services in the future. I started looking for a new job when my time card went missing. Took me a few weeks, but I found a position that paid well enough and accepted my assistant manager exam certificate as a qualification to start as an assistant manager instead of an assistant manager in training. Story 13. When I was 18, I was frequently late to a barista job I had. They informed me that I could either quit or be fired. I chose to quit. That was the closest I have ever come to being fired, and it motivated me to get my act together. Story 14. I had a couple of strokes and a heart attack 2 years ago from a drug overdose, so my memory isn't what it used to be. I'm 29 now for context. Since the accident, I've had over a dozen jobs trying to find one where I can excel and take my time learning. I can still learn and memorize. It just takes me longer than average. In my last couple of jobs through temporary agencies, whenever I felt comfortable enough to tell them I had a brain injury, I never mentioned it was a stroke. They let me go the next day. I found a job as a drill press and CNC machine helper, and it's been going all right so far. I got hired by this company directly thanks to a friend who works there as an inspector. I haven't disclosed my brain injury yet, hoping I won't have to for a long time until they understand my work ethic and get to know me as a person. Story 15. I refuse to overlook my client's systematic defrauding of customers. I had another client who instructed me to do something unethical, possibly in violation of Securities and Exchange Commission regulations. I refused. Story 16. I was terminated from a large home improvement store for failing to lock 3 exit doors during a closing shift. They claimed the alarms were triggered 45 minutes after I left the building. They also stated that the local police were dispatched when the salary manager arrived. No video footage of the incident was ever shown to me. I spoke to another police officer who was on duty at the time. He told me that the manager was in and out of the building within 4 minutes. The doors that the company claimed I did not lock or power down were on the opposite side of the entrance the manager used. It's a very fast walk to lock 3 doors and reset the alarm in a large home improvement store. Story 17. I miscarried a baby at 17 weeks. When I returned to work after 3 days off, I had a meeting, and the human resources manager informed me that my job was now redundant. They said they could not have someone who took 3 days off work for no reason. Story 18. Our division reported an issue with the financial system and accounts in place. We faced repercussions, including mass layoffs. I was threatened with jail time due to alleged misappropriation of public funds. Thankfully, I kept physical and digital backups of every transaction I was authorized to make. I submitted an audit of my account, covering nearly 2 years of credit history, along with memos and signatures from higher-ups to authorize transactions. They were not pleased, but eventually the charges were dropped. Story 19. Not me, a former coworker. She had it all. She was earning substantial monthly commissions and had some of the most successful clients in the business. They were very loyal to her. She went through a difficult time personally and coped with alcohol. Our company provided her with a lot of support and time and would have sent her to rehabilitation if she had agreed. She was offered a performance improvement plan and quit that day. She joined the competitor and collapsed at her desk within weeks of starting there. It is truly sad, and I miss the friend she was before alcoholism affected her. Story 20. I had strep throat and then influenza A back-to-back within the same month. I missed about a week of work but brought in a doctor's note, so I thought I was covered. However, I was wrong. They let me work 9 more days, and on that final day, they allowed me to work the entire shift before terminating my employment. I lived on site as a maintenance worker, so I had to move out a couple of weeks later as well. It's all right though. I wasn't blindsided by any of it. This situation was just a normal property management issue. It's a very toxic industry that I'm still in. Story 21. I received 13 messages from my boss expressing frustration that I didn't get into the cooler after closing time. It was so busy that it was already half an hour past the end of my shift when I walked out that night. I had done the job for 2.5 years without any issues, but this new boss seemed to dislike me for personal reasons. I used some strong language in my text response because I thought 13 messages was excessive. Her 14th message informed me that I was fired. I enjoyed 3 months of unemployment while I took care of personal matters, and then I found a new job. She fired me, but shortly after, the rest of the store staff quit, leaving her with one employee to run the store from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. I am much happier in my current position and grateful that she fired me. Story 22. I have no clear understanding. There has been constant praise, but it feels insincere. The phrase, "I can't run this business without you," seems like nonsense. I believe it may be related to my efforts to explain tariffs. He literally told me, "You're my favorite person here," right before terminating my employment. My former boss has now sued me twice. The second lawsuit is still pending, so we will see if he attempts a third when I successfully get this one dismissed as well. Story 23. I was a packer and always assigned to that position. One day, I was pulled to do a random job in a different department without any prior knowledge of what I was doing. I was informed that the packers were let go early, so I clocked out with them. The next day, my boss waited for me at the clock to tell me I had clocked out early and that it was considered a voluntary resignation. It was my first job, and I was extremely confused. Story 24. I was fired for requesting a vacation during my previous shift. My performance was cited as the reason. 5 workdays ago, they said it would take a few months to properly assess my performance. Story 25. My boss found out that I was looking for another job and fired me instead. I received temporary health insurance for a few weeks. It's unfortunate, considering I was planning to leave anyway. Story 26. I have never been fired, but when I worked in car sales, I had a difficult manager who would threaten my job as a way to motivate me. He pulled me into his office a week before the month ended and went off on how I was about to be fired, saying he was doing his best to help me keep my job, but that I was next on the chopping block. He was yelling and cursing at me, looking like his head was about to explode. Clearly, he hadn't looked at my sales numbers for the month when he chose to do this. A couple of days later, I submitted my resignation, effective immediately. I later found out from a coworker that even without working that last week, I was the 3rd highest grosser out of about 14 salespeople for the month. Story 27. The last time I was fired was due to a toxic retail job, which was unexpected. Instead of handling it maturely by keeping my head down, finding something else, and quitting, I gradually gave up. The job was taking a toll on my mental health as I struggled to keep it together while dealing with my emotions. In the months leading up to this, I lost my mother, my dream job, and had to cope with my father's anguish and health issues. I had also recently discovered that I was autistic but hadn't shared this with anyone at that time. To sum it up, my attitude during that difficult period was not well received. However, it turned out for the best. The workplace deteriorated after my departure, and almost everyone I worked with was either fired or left under pressure, not even 10 years later. In a way, I was lucky to get a head start on figuring out my life after that job. Pushed me to work hard to reach the point where I am now, and I can proudly say that I enjoy my work and engage in some really interesting projects that most people wouldn't typically consider. Story 28. I worked at a survey call center where we had to ask questions strictly following the script and complete the survey within a specific time frame. It was a mindless job. One day I called about crop seeds. A senior man, who was nearly 90 years old, answered the call. He had difficulty understanding what I was saying, but agreed to participate in the survey. Each question required several attempts to ask and took even longer to answer. At one point, I posed a question that had an obvious yes answer based on his previous responses and mentioned this to him. He agreed, so I marked it down. After I completed the call, my supervisor approached me and informed me that they had been listening in because I took so long. Due to my attempt to influence the results, I was fired immediately. I had never felt such relief leaving a stressful job that paid minimum wage. Story 29. I worked for a technology company that catered to the adult streaming industry. Although I never wanted to take the job, the chief executive officer pursued me, and I was desperate to retain my visa after leaving a toxic workplace. So I accepted it. Things were okay at first. I performed well and received positive feedback from everyone. However, I made a couple of mistakes which led the chief marketing officer, who had never liked me, to target me. A week before my probation period ended, the chief marketing officer fired me. The chief executive officer who hired me completely ignored me afterward. Now, I work for a company where I do not have to hide my job. I was never comfortable selling software intended for exploitative purposes. Story 30. I have been dismissed from several jobs, but my favorite experience was telling a customer to be quiet while I worked at a call center. Story 31. I was slowly getting sick from what we now know was a dying organ that nearly killed me over the span of 3 years. I was fired after calling out for 3 days due to constant vomiting. I still go to church with one of the owners, who feels incredibly bad about the situation. The other owner hired and fired me. Story 32. The official reason given for my termination was falsifying records, but the reality was I worked at a picture studio in the mall where corporate expected us to attract 5 new customers each day. Sometimes we would walk around the mall handing out coupons, but on other days we would simply enter fake names into the system as new customers. The senior manager was the one who instructed us to do this. I was an assistant manager and got caught during my shift. Most of us who worked there were teens or in our early 20s, so I wasn't too upset about being fired. I was more irritated that I had driven to work that morning only to be let go. Couldn't they have waited until the end of my shift the day before so I could sleep in? Story 33. My boss yelled at me because I had to reschedule an appointment since the client was not going to be home. I parked my work truck and got a ride home. He then had to find the work truck in western Kansas and drive it back to Coffeyville, which is 2 hours away. Story 34. My first real job was going well until we got a new chief risk officer. He did not like my boss, and a few months later, my boss left the company in tears and never returned. 1 month after that, I was called into his office with the head of human resources and informed that I had not performed my job well, without any specific details, and was given 2 months to improve. Afterward, I spoke with the head of human resources, who told me to, tough luck, suck it up. My boss was replaced and faced the task of either firing me or risking his own position. He was experienced enough to understand the situation and that this was not a good environment for me. As a result, he helped me secure a new job through his network. Even though I only had a 1-year contract that was nearly expired, the convoluted way this situation unfolded was mainly due to the American owners of the company not understanding European labor laws. They faced costly lawsuits from the founders after they were terminated without cause. Story 35. The closest I got to being fired was when I quit 2 steps ahead of an actual firing. Here's the situation. I was working for a title loan company as a developer. This company pretty much disliked my department, as it was solely an expense. The individual who set up their IT department and hired all of us left because they were paying new managers more simply because my department cost a lot of money. I also became familiar with their attempts at quietly firing employees when they hit 5 years and earned better benefits. Seriously, except for executive management, they had less than 5% of the employees who had been there longer than 5 years. Due to a series of events, I ended up with a junior developer who did not want to work with me. I tried just about everything. Finally, I locked him out of the Git repository but did not inform anyone. Then I lied about it when confronted. That same day, I did it again and lied about it again. That was a Thursday, and I was suspended until Tuesday. They were going to decide whether to fire me for cause. I do not know if they would have, but I do know they would have made it a hostile work environment. On Sunday, I got up for church with the distinct impression to quit. I talked to my parents and siblings, and they all thought it was a good idea. So I did. Now, I say I do not know if they would have fired me because of their reaction to my quitting. They were very put off. Because I showed up to work while I was suspended, they treated me like an intruder. When I arrived, I waited in the lobby to be escorted to my desk to gather my things. But they did announce the secret intruder message over the public address system. The manager who took over my department and the head of human resources were really upset about my quitting. Story 36. I was a new sales associate earning a very low base wage to start. I was required to attend a company-wide sales conference over a weekend without pay, with no days off in lieu for losing the weekend. So, I left a little early, around 2 p.m. on Sunday. There were many people present, but it felt pretty pointless as everyone was just standing around talking, and the attendees were much older than me. I was fired when I came into work on Monday. I didn't say anything while my boss explained why I was being let go. I simply stood up, said, "I'm glad I'll never be you," and walked out. The positive aspect was that I had worked in the warehouse for years before moving to the sales department. I was planning to quit the warehouse job, but they offered me the sales position. Therefore, I received a severance check instead of leaving empty-handed. Story 37. Fired from being a cart pusher at Walmart for stealing 2 pennies from a Coinstar machine. Apparently, a customer used it earlier in the day. Later on, I showed up to socialize with the girls at the customer service desk and spotted the pennies in the tray. I took them out to examine, and as I was about to walk the 10 feet to the counter, I received a radio call. I stuffed the pennies in my pocket and went to respond. I completely forgot they were there, due to my attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A couple of weeks later, Asset Protection called me into the office. The customer reported the missing 2 pennies, and they investigated. It didn't take long for them to catch me in the act of finding the pennies in the tray and pocketing them after hearing the radio call. I offered to pay back the 2 pennies and jokingly suggested I had a nickel on hand, but they fired me on the spot once my memory caught up with me. I also admitted to taking $10 in tips. I took more but suspected they would investigate this as well. They escorted me to the ATM and made me withdraw $10 to repay the company. They gave me my last check, which included all the sick and vacation time they never informed me I had accumulated, and walked me out like a criminal. I crossed the street to a temporary agency and got a job within 45 minutes at a food manufacturing facility from which I had been previously laid off, so it all worked out. Story 38. I moved to Florida on a whim when I was 20. I landed a job at an advertising company in Clearwater. They offered classes as part of their benefits, which I was eager to take to try to grow. They made me take an IQ test, interviewed me 4 times, and after hiring me, asked me to sign a paper stating that in no way is this company pushing religious values. I thought that last part was especially odd but went along with it, thinking it was a Southern thing. So I started the job, and on the first day, I attended the required class. The teacher gave us all books and asked us to open them. One page had a picture and a sentence that said, "Jimmy eats the sandwich." The teacher then asked the 3 of us there, "Why would Jimmy eat the sandwich?" At this point, I thought the class was a joke. I sat there in silence until lunchtime. I stayed in the conference room to eat my lunch. After I got up to stretch my legs, I noticed floor-to-ceiling cabinets across the room. Out of boredom, I opened them, and the entire bookshelf was filled with Scientology books. I stood there in disbelief, unsure of what to do. A lady walked by, saw me in there, and immediately asked, "What are you doing in here?" I told her I was on lunch, and she replied, "You're not high enough level to see that," before walking away in a huff. The next day when I came to work, they fired me without giving me a reason. I cried as I walked home, but I realized I had dodged a bullet. Story 39. I was an accidental troublemaker, and it was justified for them to fire me, but they handled it very well. I was a summer intern while attending university. In my first year, I worked on office technology tasks that I enjoyed. However, when they brought me back for my second year, things had changed. They had a new technology lead in the office, and they didn't have enough work for me to do in the office, so I was also assigned to help in the warehouse, which I did not enjoy. The new technology lead disliked me because I consistently interrupted conversations with suggestions. Additionally, I complained loudly to other warehouse employees about not enjoying the warehouse work. I was stuck in a student mindset, assuming everyone else was in the same situation. It never occurred to me that the technology lead was knowledgeable, and if he wanted my input, he would ask. Likewise, I failed to recognize that the warehouse employees enjoyed their jobs to some extent and did not appreciate a student sounding elitist by demeaning their work. Eventually, the manager called me into his office on a Monday, paid me until the end of the week, fired me, and politely explained everything I mentioned. It was the best firing. Lesson learned, I would gladly be fired by him again. Story 40. My entire department, consisting of approximately 45 people, was laid off because our jobs were outsourced. I even trained our replacements. Story 41. I have a knee issue where my kneecap pops out of place. One day, while working as a cashier at 16, my kneecap popped out. I needed to go home to rest my leg because I was unable to walk. The store thought I injured myself on the job and asked me to fill out workers' compensation papers, but I didn't hurt myself at work. As a result, they fired me, saying I was a liability. Story 42. I work in the vehicle repair industry and have to undergo random drug tests. I recreationally use marijuana and got tested at a bad time. I had to be tested more often due to a minor accident while also having THC in my system, which led to my termination. I have been fired twice for marijuana use. Having a supportive foreman can only postpone a drug test for so long. I lay in the bed I made and found a different job that is even worse. I can return to my previous employer next month. People can say what they want, but marijuana helps me and it can temporarily affect my employment status. I don't care. I'm good at what I do, and I do not use it at work. What I do in my free time is my own business. Story 43. I was fired on the first day of my most recent job due to overemployment. I was interviewed the day before. Story 44. I spent too much money on the monthly internet. I think I used a whole 1 gigabyte for the month surfing web pages, and it cost the company a fortune. Story 45. I started working in a physical laundry delivery service, but I was recovering from COVID-19 and couldn't handle it. I managed document control at a medical company, and I began to feel restless and develop unhealthy habits. I started advocating for better working conditions for the back-of-house staff while also dealing with carpal tunnel syndrome. Story 46. I showed up intoxicated. I couldn't even read my orders written in my order book because I was a server. I finished my section, but the manager had one of the other servers tell me that I needed to go home without completing my side work, and the other server would handle it for me. Feeling frustrated by the manager's passive-aggressive move, I kicked the back door and shouted, "Forget this place, I'm out." I forgot it was an open kitchen. Oops. Story 47. I was fired from one job for a reason I still find insane. I was working at a very busy restaurant during the COVID-19 pandemic as a shift lead. At the start of the shift, my general manager informed me that he and a few other staff members who were paid more than I was would be standing outside to greet customers and hand out orders while I and several others managed things inside. I was immediately upset but decided to just go along with it. It was Friday night, and we were overwhelmed in the kitchen. I looked outside and saw my general manager and the others he had gathered sitting in lawn chairs, smoking cigarettes, laughing, and having a good time. At this point, I was genuinely about to lose it. One of the staff outside came in, put his hands on my shoulders, and told me I was doing a great job. I immediately told him to leave me alone and shoved him off. He asked why I was upset, and when I explained my frustration, he said, "Well, yeah, that makes sense, but wouldn't you take advantage of it too if you were in my position?" I nearly punched him in the face. The general manager came inside and asked to speak to me outside. Before the kitchen door could even close, I started cursing him out, calling him a loser and a piece of work. I saw a vein in his forehead pop, and he fired me on the spot. He called me a few days later asking me to come back, which I would have considered because I genuinely enjoyed working there, but I had already found another job with a friend that paid more. Story 48. I wasn't a team player. The team was younger than I am, and I didn't want to play hacky sack at lunch or hang out after hours. I went to work, kept to myself, and focused on my responsibilities. The company lunch was Italian, and I can't stand garlic, so I chose not to eat it. I did my job, but I wasn't friendly, and their joking around and lighthearted attitude didn't make me laugh. Story 49. I got fired because they no longer needed me as they were updating their procedures. They said that even though I am good at what I do, they needed to replace me with new and better workers. Story 50. I worked at a restaurant, and it was 8:58 p.m., 2 minutes before closing. A customer walked in and asked for his usual. He was a regular. I informed the kitchen manager, but he said no because he had closed the kitchen, so I had to turn away the customer. The next morning, I was fired for following the kitchen manager's orders. Story 51. I was fired for not wanting to write up my staff for being 6 minutes late to work and for other unethical requests. I was unemployed for 4 months and eventually found a job that pays the same. I work fewer hours and with wonderful people. Story 52. I was a frontline administrative staff member at a hospital. Apparently, I wasn't speaking to patients and their families. I wondered if my communication with patients was merely a facade. When I was asked by the team lead to choose between data entry or handling discharges, I felt that either choice would be incorrect. I chose to handle discharges since it would allow me to speak to patients. However, the feedback from the department manager indicated that I had refused to do data entry. The last straw came when a doctor entered the ward, visibly angry, for not taking matters seriously. He had called the ward requesting to speak to the nurse of a patient. He instructed me not to transfer him to the nurse's station or put him on hold, so I placed the phone on the table. I called for the nurse, but she declined to respond when I mentioned the doctor's name. When I informed him that the nurse was unavailable, he insisted I find any nurse. Unfortunately, no one was willing to speak to him. While I searched for a nurse to assist him, the doctor hung up without my realization until I picked the phone back up. He then stormed into the ward and yelled at me. It is important to note that there were nurses around, and some off-duty nurses were at the reception desk joking nearby. My senior colleague, who was with me, attempted to explain to him that the nurses had refused to take his call. Despite both of us submitting incident reports, my senior's explanation to the department manager did not help my situation. Story 53. I was fired from my first job after being there for a total of 3 weeks. I don't remember everything that was said, but I do remember the manager telling me I was too loud for the customers. At the time, that reason sounded nonsensical to me, and it influenced my perception of employers, making me think they could fire me at any moment for no reason at all. I questioned why I should even bother looking for a job, leading me to approach my job search with minimal effort, which, of course, got me nowhere. This fueled my belief that employers were untrustworthy, and I continued to struggle. Fast forward a bit, and I was recounting the story of why I was fired to a job center advisor. They informed me that my voice had a tendency to project itself. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. It never occurred to me that the first manager actually had a legitimate complaint. It turns out I might have been unintentionally shouting at people all that time without realizing it, while no one mentioned it to me. Want to know how long it took for someone to finally say something? 10 years. For 10 years, I was struggling with unemployment because I misunderstood what the manager of my first job was telling me. The really strange part? I'm about 90% sure I was informed about my voice on the exact 10th anniversary of the day I was fired. Story 54. In 2009, I experienced a layoff instead of a firing. It was a brutal time, especially after my ex-wife and I had our second child. There were absolutely no jobs available. It took me until the end of April 2010 to find a new job, but everything turned out well in the end. Story 55. The new general manager claimed I lied about getting a ticket, but he never asked. I worked at a dealership at the time as a service porter. Story 56. The closest I've come to getting fired was during a college job. I provided my schedule, but they assigned me the worst possible shifts. I had to take a bus to work from school, which took half an hour each way, and I was only working 2 days a week for about 2 hours. Although I lived within walking distance of my job and had more suitable availability on the other 3 school days, my manager seemed to dislike me for some reason and was trying to make me quit. It ultimately worked out because the woman I was living with, in exchange for room and board while babysitting, thought the situation was ridiculous. She decided to give me some extra payment, not much, but enough to cover my bills until I found a new job. I have always been a diligent worker and maintained a good rapport with my managers, so I genuinely have no idea what her issue was with me. She let me go but kept the girl who couldn't distinguish between different vegetables, and we were working in a sandwich shop. Story 57. I was slow and ineffective as a line cook at A&W. I was also fired for eating chicken wings that were intended to be thrown out at what is now the Circle K chain, which was called Winks back then. Story 58. I got a job at a liquor store in college 20 years ago. Another person and I were hired at the same time. It was a small, family-owned establishment, so the extra rolls of change and $1 and $5 bills were kept in a little lockbox under the register, totaling about $200. The other person and I worked 3 days together, splitting time on the register, in the cooler and stocking shelves. On the 4th day, I showed up to start work, but the other person did not. On the 3rd day, he had cleaned out the change box, but they couldn't prove which one of us it was, so he got fired. Story 59. I had a baby and was terminated during my 2-week maternity leave. I was a contractor, so there was nothing I could do. Story 60. I used to work the cash register for a major clothing store. One month, I was consistently short on the register, and the day manager warned me that one more time would result in my termination. It happened again, even though I made sure to be even at the end of my shift. At night, another manager was responsible for emptying all the cash registers. It turned out that the night manager had been taking money from them. I discovered this long after I was fired when I heard that the manager was escorted by the police out of the store. Story 61. I was consistently late and had received several warnings. In my defense, the gym was about an hour and a half away. In retrospect, I should have asked for a transfer. Goodbye, Planet Fitness. Story 62. I was working at UPS, and they were paying $400 to $500 a week for 4 weeks of training. After the training was over, I decided I didn't want to work there anymore. I arrived on Friday morning, ready to start my shift, but I collected my last check instead, left the building, and went home. They called my phone multiple times looking for me, thinking I was missing. When I finally answered, they told me not to come back, and I responded that I wasn't planning on it. Technically, I quit before they fired me. That job was too physically demanding. Story 63. To this day, I don't know exactly what happened. They told me I lacked attention to detail, even when I recovered their data hours before their biggest showcase. The intern was the one who accidentally deleted the information. I thought saving the data would earn me extra points. Looking back, I never felt comfortable because I was the only non-youth and not upper-class person in that business. Story 64. I'm just lucky that I wasn't arrested. I ruined a good job and I had a great boss. I was 22. I justified stealing by pointing out that it was old product that would not sell. I still feel regret at 35. Story 65. I was hired to help open a burger restaurant when I was 18. I was responsible for running the register and guest services. In the second week, they hired a young woman for that role and decided I would be better suited for washing dishes. By the third week, They hired an older woman, a mother, to wash the dishes and informed me that they no longer had a job for me. I purchased the uniform, shoes, and everything needed for the 3-week job, plus 1 week of training. Story 66. I am an Army veteran. I worked at Mission Barbecue, a restaurant that claims to support hometown heroes. I was fired for calling in sick with a 101 degrees Fahrenheit fever. When I returned to work the following week, they slammed the door shut and locked it, preventing me from getting in. For employees came out to inform me that I no longer worked there, but they wouldn't explain why, and they refused to let me speak to the general manager. I tried to call every day, but they kept lying to me about the manager not being available, which was untrue because a manager must be present to open the restaurant. It wasn't until my case manager from Veterans Affairs called them with me beside her that I was finally able to reach the manager by phone. I was fired for missing 2 days for which I had called out in advance. Later, I discovered from a friend who experienced the same situation that my bosses and most of the staff were transphobic. So, it seems Mission Barbecue has an anti-LGBTQ stance. Story 67. I went on break and drove to the recently closed Toys R Us across the street. The snowplows had cleared the area after a blizzard followed by a clear afternoon, creating large snow ramps taller than my car. There were many abandoned shopping carts in the lot, so I positioned one in front of my car and accelerated, hoping the cart would catch some air on the jump while also needing to stop in time to avoid crashing into the snowbank. I was 16, and my work buddy, who was quite high, cackled as the cart launched. The car was a 1978 Plymouth Volare, which predates my birth. I think I actually got fired for something else. Oddly, I did more work than most people there, just not at that moment. No regrets. That job was terrible. Story 68. I worked for a Toyota dealership. I was handling used car sales while also raising a small child who had not yet started school, and their mother was working nights. We only had one car, which made it challenging to manage transportation and caused us to be late frequently. My employer was not pleased with this situation, and I eventually lost my job. Story 69. I injured my wrists and elbows while tapping 2-inch eye bolts as a young adult and was placed on modified work duty for 1 day before being fired. Story 70. I punched a coworker in the face. The coworker tried to cover for me, telling the manager he ran into a rack. But when asked, I admitted what happened. It took them 2 weeks to fire me, and they phrased it as separating me from the company. It was a ridiculous corporate situation. This was my biggest mistake for sure, and it's part of a long list. In a couple of months, it will have been 11 years. Story 71. I worked with a girl at a summer camp for 2 weeks about 25 years ago. Then I started working at a company that hired us both at the same time 2 years ago. I saw the shop foreman harassing her, spoke up, and then we were both fired. 8 more people have been let go over the past year. We all think he has incriminating information on someone, and we believe a future class action lawsuit will be significant. Story 72. I joined a funded startup after working in multinational corporations for over a decade. I had a great time learning and working in a fast-paced culture. After about 4 years, we acquired a new majority investor who was not aligned with the startup's long journey to profitability. They began quarterly profit tracking, and after a few quarters decided to implement cost cuts. I was one of the highest paid individuals at the company and had experienced rapid growth in both salary and career, but I was asked to leave. 2 months later, the entire company was shut down. I have no regrets, as it taught me important lessons. 1. Financial planning is crucial, and living frugally is very helpful. I had enough savings to sustain myself for the 6 to 8 months it took to regain my footing. The golden cage is real. I advanced so quickly that I exceeded the budgets of many other companies where I interviewed. Not every funding round is beneficial, especially when the incoming investor lacks knowledge of market dynamics. One should always keep interviewing to understand what the market is seeking and to be prepared for opportunities. This also helps you gauge your worth outside your current role. Story 73. I worked in a warehouse picking products and building pallets for shipment. I couldn't meet the quota, and at the end of my 3-month probationary period, I was let go. Story 74. I applied for a management position on my team 3 years ago. I interviewed, but they chose my friend who deserved it. He spent 2 years developing me for that position, but when he left, they promoted someone else from another department who was friends with the owner's family because I was too valuable to my team. Around that time, we transitioned to remote work. For the next 2 years, since my upward mobility was gone, and I was able to get more work done than the rest of the team, I completed all my work in the first and last hour of my day. I used a mouse jiggler to take naps or do whatever I wanted. Eventually, I was caught because I started accumulating overtime each day to pad my checks. They decided to investigate my productivity to find out why I seemed so busy. I took responsibility, was fired, went on unemployment, and found a much better job with upward mobility that excites me again, quicker than I expected. No regrets. Story 75. I told the manager he was a difficult person. I was more annoyed about being dismissed because it was a true statement. He was indeed a difficult person and likely still is. Story 76. Performance issues are affecting my productivity. Simply put, I'm not up to the task and I'm feeling down because of my own poor decisions. Story 77. They stopped giving me shifts because I turned 16, which meant they had to pay me a higher rate. I found another job but might have forgotten to tell them. They called me in a fluster one night, asking where I was because I was scheduled to work. It was one of the best conversations I've ever had in my life. Story 78. I have been in hospitality for over 20 years. In my most recent job, I was the general manager at a small beachfront boutique hotel. I had been there for almost 4 years and took that property from being ranked 6th in the town to competing for the #1 spot when the previous owner sold to a small boutique company. Things were acceptable for the first 2 months. We had a seasonal business, and in the summer we were fully booked as we were one of the best properties around. However, the slow season made it appear that we had too much staff and leadership in the new company's eyes. They quickly fired my front office manager and then dismissed my maintenance manager. They demoted my housekeeping manager and stripped my front desk supervisor of her duties. Essentially, I went from operating with a full leadership team to being a one-man show. As summer came around, I did what I had to do. Cleaning bathrooms, running towels, answering phones, fixing beds, doing laundry, and security. They were not pleased that some of the corporate duties took a backseat to daily operations. My regional manager said he understood, but the home office did not. They insisted that a property of our size should operate with just one manager. But they had no idea how busy our property gets, as it is mostly families, which means there are 4 to 6 people in each room. This is quite different from a business hotel, where typically one business person stays in the room during the day and just sleeps there. They promised to send help, but no one ever came, and I was eventually let go shortly after the busy season. No official reason was given, just that things were not working out. They offered a generous severance package to avoid any conflict. They knew I was unhappy with them and the structure, and that sentiment was mutual. I valued that property. My perspective on hotel companies has changed drastically after that experience. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.